This is Korea News for March 25, 2022. The number of new coronavirus cases has fallen to 390,000. According to the Korea Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, KCDC, as of midnight on the 24th, there were about 395,600 new confirmed cases of COVID-19. The cumulative number of confirmed cases is 1822,836, with 395,531 confirmed cases in Korea and 67 imported from abroad. Pre-registration for the corona vaccine for children aged 5 to 11 has started on the 24th, but it is known that 60.5% of parents said they had no intention of getting vaccinated. Choi, a 32-year-old office worker who lives alone in an office hotel, recently tested positive for COVID-19 and rested at home for a week. Recently, seeing his acquaintances get infected one by one, he deliberately wore a thin fashion mask instead of a KF mask and spent half a day in the crowded city on weekends to loosen up the quarantine measures. Then, a self-diagnostic test was performed with a rapid antigen diagnostic kit purchased at a pharmacy, and the result was positive. Choi said, "Even if salaried workers do not receive subsidies, they get a week's paid vacation from the country, so it's dog honey." With the cumulative number of confirmed coronavirus cases exceeding 10 million in Korea, there are many young people who are intentionally infected with the purpose of taking paid leave at work or receiving living subsidies from the government. As the perception that the coronavirus is not dangerous to young people is widespread, people are asked to self-quarantine for 7 days after inducing infection by loosening daily quarantine measures such as wearing a mask and washing hands. The Presidential Takeover Committee ordered the Ministry of Trade, Industry, and Energy to restore the nuclear power plant ecosystem, asking the Ministry of Trade, Industry, and Energy to review the resumption of construction of Shinhanul Units 3 and 4 as soon as possible. It is interpreted that the Moon Jae-in government has started in earnest to abolish the nuclear phase-out policy. On the 24th, the Transition Committee received a report from the Ministry of Industry at the office of the Transition Committee in Tungidong, Jongno-gu, Seoul, and said, it demanded that the procedural plan for resuming the construction of Shinhanul Nuclear Power Plant Units 3 and 4 and the task of restoring the nuclear power plant ecosystem should be promptly reviewed. Next, they asked them to derive an energy mix, the proportion of each energy source that minimizes the burden on the public in the process of promoting carbon neutrality. If only renewable energy is increased to achieve carbon neutrality, the public burden such as electricity bills can increase. The Transition Committee's order to restore the nuclear power plant ecosystem is interpreted as the purpose of the new government going beyond the resumption of nuclear power plant construction and overturning the major framework of nuclear power plant policy. The Ministry of Trade, Industry, and Energy also announced to the Transition Committee that it would re-establish the nuclear power plant policy in response to resource security such as high oil prices. Shinhanul Nuclear Power Plant Units 3 and 4, located in Ulsan, North Gyeongsang Province, were reflected in the 2008 Sasha Electricity Supply and Demand Basic Plan and were scheduled to be operated sequentially after the design was completed. However, construction was halted along with 4 other new nuclear power plants in 2017 according to the Moon Jae-in government's nuclear phase-out policy. The pension system analysis data released in January by the Korea Economic Research Institute under the Federation of Korean Entrepreneurs contain the content that you may not receive a single penny from the national pension since 1990. It made me feel realistic. Korea Economic Cooperation and Development Organization, OECD, and National Statistical Office, OECD, compared the aging situation and pension systems of Korea and 5 major countries. He pointed out that the burden will be passed on to future generations. Citing the National Assembly Budget Office's forecast that the national pension fiscal balance will turn into a deficit in 2039 and the reserve will run out in 2055, the Korea Economic Daily predicted that if the current national pension system premium rate of 9% and income replacement rate of 40% is maintained, he argued that people born in 1990 may not be able to receive the national pension until they are eligible for benefits. The Japanese Ministry of Defense captured and released footage of an object believed to be a North Korean missile falling from its own waters while North Korea fired one ICBM into the East Sea on the 24th. North Korea fired one ICBM intercontinental ballistic missile into the East Sea from the Sunan area of Pyongyang at 2:34 p.m. on the same day. In response to North Korea's missile launch, Japan's Ministry of Defense and Self-Defense Forces immediately launched maritime patrol aircraft P-3C and F-15 fighters to collect damage information off the coast of Aomori Prefecture. In the process, the F-15 fighter pilot caught an object believed to be falling from a ballistic missile launched by North Korea in the air. According to the released video, an object falling with white smoke was seen next to the flying F-15 fighter. The Japanese Ministry of Defense said that North Korea fired a projectile believed to be a new ICBM class on the same day, and after flying for 71 minutes, the projectile landed within 150 kilometers west of Toshima Peninsula in Hokkaido, the EEZ of Japan's exclusive economic zone. Japanese authorities estimate the projectile's highest altitude is 6,000 kilometers and its flight range is about 1,100 kilometers. On the 24th, the South Korean military immediately responded by conducting joint firepower exercises when North Korea started to test fire an intercontinental ballistic missile, ICBM. It is reported that the military authorities are planning to conduct an elephant walk training involving 30 F-35A stealth aircraft, the strongest fighter in the Korean military in the near future. North Korea's Kim Jong-un fears most stealth planes lined up on the runway to show off his majesty and then take off one after another to show off his deterrence against North Korea through this drill. The military fired one Hyeomu-2 ballistic missile and one tactical short-range missile, ATACMS, from Gangneung, Gangwon-do, at around 4:25 p.m., 1 hour and 51 minutes after North Korea fired the ICBM on the same day. Then, the F-15K fighter took off and fired two JDAM Joint Direct Strike Missiles, which are air-to-surface missiles, and from the Aegis ship, one surface-to-surface missile Haesong-2 was fired towards a target in the East Sea, assuming the origin of North Korea's provocation. When North Korea launched its ICBM Hwasong-15 in November 2017, the number of missiles increased and the overall performance improved compared to when the military conducted a joint strike drill. The Joint Chiefs of Staff, unusually, released photos and videos of the training that day, saying, "Our military has the capability and readiness to precisely strike the origin and command and support facilities at any time in the event of a North Korean missile launch." According to a government source on the 24th, the military has begun preparations for the Elephant Walk training using about 30 F-35A stealth aircraft. It is expected to be implemented as early as this week, the source said. This training is a training to master the procedure to quickly sortie after loading as many weapons as possible on the aircraft. The semiconductor industry is paying attention as NVIDIA, the strongest global fabless semiconductor design company, mentioned that it could utilize Intel's foundry production line in the future. NVIDIA, which has mainly collaborated with TSMC in Taiwan and Samsung Electronics in Korea, is analyzing this idea that it will be bad news for Samsung Electronics rather than TSMC. According to Bloomberg, an American economic media outlet on the 24th, NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang said at an online conference held on the 23rd local time, "We are considering Intel as a new foundry partner." NVIDIA, the world's largest graphics processing unit GPU company, expanded its business area by unveiling the ARM Neoverse-based Central Processing Unit CPU Grace Superchip for data centers on the 23rd. NVIDIA is currently entrusting TSMC with most of its consignment production, while the rest is being produced through Samsung Electronics. NVIDIA, which needed more foundries as its business area expanded, mentioned Intel instead of Samsung Electronics, and it is interpreted as expressing its will to secure various production lines. Some in the industry are predicting the possibility that if Intel secures NVIDIA's supply, NVIDIA will reduce the quantity it entrusted to its existing partners or end the relationship and become more dependent on Intel, a U.S. company. This is because US President Biden recently mentioned semiconductors as a key component day after day while emphasizing economic security. The United States has been making all-out efforts since last year to strengthen its semiconductor ecosystem. Recently, they are paying special attention to semiconductor security, such as preparing a bill to support the semiconductor industry with about KRW 52 billion and KRW 63.4 trillion. Intel, realizing the importance of the foundry, has also announced the resumption of the foundry business and is pouring a lot of money into it. Intel announced on the 15th that it will invest about 109 trillion, $80 billion, in Europe over 10 years. Last year, he said he would invest about 24.4 trillion, $20 billion, in Arizona in the US and Ohio in the US at the beginning of this year to build a high-tech semiconductor factory, including a foundry. As Intel's foundry business is being pushed forward in earnest, the semiconductor industry is predicting that US fabless will choose Intel instead of TSMC or Samsung Electronics, led by the White House, and make the semiconductor supply chain more densely centered in their country. Currently, 4 of the top 5 global fabless companies are American companies. Qualcomm ranked first, Nvidia second, Broadcom third, AMD fifth. Apple, which is not included in the rankings by classification, and Amazon, Google, and Tesla, which are using their own chips, are also there. An industry official said, if Intel's foundry starts operating in earnest, it is clear that the foundry market, which was currently divided between TSMC and Samsung Electronics, will be split into 3 battles. The former is expected to be hit harder. Samsung Electronics needs to quickly get rid of the issue of yield, that is, the ratio of good products, before Intel settles down, he said. Thank you for watching today. Please like and subscribe.